Welcome back in. It is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel. Alongside, as always, for TEGS is Josh Appelbaum. Josh, what's going on, man?
JBT doing great. Yeah, exciting show today. We got a lot of NBA talk coming on, so really excited to have Aaron Renning come on from Better IQ. He's a sharp professional basketball bettor. JVT, I know you're a big NBA guy as well, so got a lot of systems we want to talk about, a lot of trends, a lot of different edges you should look for in betting on the NBA. So it should be a fun show specifically for NBA fans.
Yes, I am very excited. I actually demanded that this show be when I am on because you know how much I dig the NBA, and I've been sitting around watching games from just this season, just replays, because I have my league pass, and that's all I've been doing because I want it back this badly. So let's start with this because before we get into the actual specifics of it, the NBA has actually been one of the more progressive leagues, Josh, and Adam Silver has been kind of behind that movement going back all the way to 2014.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start because before we get into all these tips, trends, looking for situations to make money in the NBA, we got to give a shout out to the commissioner, Adam Silver, because when really the sports betting wave of legalization took off, he was really the first commissioner that really got out in front of it. And in 2014, he wrote an op ed in the New York Times. It was called Legalize and Regulate Sports Betting. And really, this was considered a watershed moment in the fight to legalize betting. You saw Chris Christie kind of put that first lawsuit against the leagues, and there were ups and downs. But really, this is when public sentiment changed, and really, you still had some old guard type commissioners trying to kind of fight against legalized betting. But really, Adam Silver, he saw the future, and it was a really smart move by him. And kind of one quote that stuck out with me in that op-ed back in 2014 seems like ages ago, but Silver nailed it. He said, "Sports betting should be brought out of the underground and into the sunlight, where it can be appropriately monitored and regulated." And I think that's really been a great call. And looking back on it, he was really the first commish to get out in front and really set up his league for success by embracing betting, not by trying to fight it off.
Right, and they're the first league to sign up with an operator in terms of the tandem right with MGM. They were the first league to do so, and part of that was some interesting stuff. Like I remember the first year they had their partnership with the MGM on their website. If you had an NBA.com account, you could pick a win total for every single team. Over and under is one of those free prizes free contests you can enter for a prize for NBA fans. But I will say this, Josh, and I think you'd agree. It's not all roses when it comes to them being progressive because Adam Silver was also one of the first commissioners to coin the term integrity fee and try to get his cut from it. So as progressive as they have been, we know what the bottom line was is they just wanted to tap into some of the money they could probably get into.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, JBT. The integrity fee is, if you really want to get operators upset, just say the word integrity fee. But yeah, I think also, the NBA did have a black eye, obviously, with the Tim Donaghy situation in the past. So I think this was a smart move for them to get out in front of it. And I remember, too, David Stern, kind of when he passed the torch to Adam Silver, he was kind of against legalized betting, but he really pushed for Adam Silver to kind of make that his number one thing to get done immediately. So again, it's not all roses, but overall, we're happy that NBA has embraced it because it really set the stage for other sports to kind of follow suit.
And I know you're going to talk about him in terms of the officials and the referee trends and whatnot. But with the Tim Donaghy thing, right? One of the guys that he contacted the most was Scott Foster, and Scott Foster is still an official in the NBA today. So, again, like there's no league is perfect, and the NBA has done a great job of pushing forward. And we'll get into it a little bit later too, of all the stats and everything that comes with the NBA that you can do as a handicapper. But they do have to fix certain things, and injuries are a big part of it too. Injury reports, right? I mean, that's one of the things I've asked a lot of NBA writers about in terms of integrity and what the NBA provides sports bettors. The injury reports have to get a lot cleaner if you're going to continue to be this champion of sports betting in the future.
Exactly. I think, it's really infuriating if you're betting on a game, or especially if you're a DFS, a daily fantasy player. You have your lineup set, you have your bet set, then all of a sudden load management comes in and Kawhi's sitting or Anthony Davis is sitting. So obviously, I think they're trying to kind of change those rules a little bit so that you have to kind of let bettors know a little more ahead of time. But again, that's one sport where injuries and load management and just being aware of who's in and who's out can really make or break a bet for you.
Yes, that or the fact that after the NBA Finals, when the Cavaliers get swept, LeBron James, he had a broken hand, or after Game 3 of the Western Conference Finals, Damian Lillard, remember that play where he dove for the ball? Yeah, he might have separated his rib there, and we knew for about 2 games, but now right? And that's it's got to be a little bit more important to let people know about that. Regardless, this is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel, Josh Appelbaum alongside. Today, our show, NBA betting. So where do you want to start, Josh, as we look ahead? You want to start with the basics here?
Yeah, so I think the basics that we can outline kind of create a foundation for our viewers and listeners, and then kind of move from there. So I think the first thing you got to know, number one, is that basketball, aside from football, is really a extremely heavily bet sport. It's a really popular sport. So obviously the NFL is king, college football, kind of the crown prince. It's a little bit behind, but really those are your most heavily bet popular sports overall. But the NBA is pretty close. That'd be kind of your third most popular sport. It's more global, I would say. You have a lot of audiences in other countries who love the NBA as well. So it's a big sport where you can really take advantage of going contrarian, which is betting against the public, and really focusing on heavily bet games. So games that are televised on TNT, TBS, ABC, ESPN. These games that kick off at 7 o'clock or 8 Eastern, and really across the country and the globe, people really flock to these games. So as a result, you can take advantage of betting against the public. You can get better numbers. I think it's also important too to remember that just like football, the NBA and basketball in general, it's predominantly a spread and an over/under sport. So you're really focusing on who's going to cover the number. Will the dog cover and lose by less than the spread, or win the game? Will the favorite cover the number, win by more than the spread? So keep that in mind. Also remember totals. We've seen totals really rise over the last, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years, probably last few years especially, where you used to see an NBA total in the low 200s. Now you're seeing totals in the 240s. So you got to remember that the public is going to be inclined to bet a lot of overs. This does create some value on unders. But just long story short, money lines are still available, but it's mostly a spread and over/under sport. You can take advantage of money lines if it's a really short spread, a point and a half, something like that. However, because it's a predominantly spread and total sport, got to keep that magic number in the back of your head, 52.38%. That's basically the number that you have to win in terms of your percentage of bets if you're assuming standard minus 110 juice in order to break even. So if you're betting on the NBA, you're betting a lot of spreads and over-unders, your goal is to win 53% of your bets or more. If you can do that, you're doing really well as a bettor.
Yeah, the totals. I love the total. So I'm more of a sides better in the NBA, and I will dabble in totals here and there. I'm trying to figure out my own system in which I can finally find reliable ways to attack totals. But you're absolutely right. Like, you can just see what types of teams that you're going to be watching on a night-to-night basis just based on the total. I remember right before we broke, in terms of the season for the NBA, Memphis and New Orleans met up, Josh. The total opened up at 247. It closed 242, and I think there was a 260 points scored in a game. So it doesn't matter how high these totals get, because the pace has changed so much in the NBA. These teams get up and down, and it's not so much about defense. Defense is still pretty good because you look at the efficiency numbers, which we'll get to, but the pace has gotten so quick in the NBA, and twos are getting traded for threes, which is why you see that shift in the totals on a night-to-night basis.
Yeah, that's a great point, JBT. Because if you're watching that Jordan documentary, Last Dance, you used to saw a lot of mid-range games, and you remember it seems like the lost art of the 15-foot jumper, and really it's been an emphasis on 3-pointers, sabermetrics, and really just data and stats analytics tells you, hey, if you're gonna shoot a long-range jumper, move back a little more, shoot the three. Kind of the numbers will tell you that's a smarter play, but that's really had a big effect on the totals. I think what is important is when you see really high totals like that, it can go one of two ways. Sometimes the public can say, oh man, that total is 240. That's ridiculously high. It's got to go under. Or they're going to say that's easily going to be a 130 to 128 game and go over. So what I look for a lot in terms of totals is kind of how does the line move? If that game you gave as an example, JBT, it opens super high 247. It starts to fall. That tells you some sharp action probably took the under, because even though heavy betting on the public went over, you saw that line fall. So we'll get to it a little bit later with totals specifically. I like to lean on a lot of divisional unders because teams in the division play each other often. That familiarity kind of leads to lower scoring games in general. But again, with totals, I think you're going to lean on a lot of pace statistics. How many possessions does each team have, head to head? But really, I look at line movement. Where does the line open? How does it move? If you can set your own power ratings and you're a really sharp guy, and you can basically have your own spread or total for a game, and then you can look for discrepancies, that's one way to do it. But we're not all super sharp. We're not all pros like that. We'll talk to Aaron Renning later because he can do that, which is fantastic. Shed some light on it. But I really look at line movement and totals. Especially if it's public usually betting the over and you see it fall, you can get a good number before it falls even further. That can be a sharp kind of reverse line underplay.
Yeah, ER's a great totals better, so I can't wait to pick his brain on that. I pick his brain all the time when it comes to betting totals. All right, so let's start. Where do you want to be in? You want to talk about these home court advantages? Because I think there's a lot when it comes to the home courts with some specific teams as well.
Yeah, so JVT, this is I think a good place to start because you got to remember because the NBA is a big what we would call public sport or just a sport in general where you get an influx of recreational bettors. You got to remember there is going to be a bias toward home teams because when an average Joe is looking to bet a game, he sees that raucous home crowd, the fact that a team didn't have to travel, being on your home court, wearing your home jersey, that can be an advantage. And you got to remember the odds makers take this into account. They're typically awarding 3 points for the home team. JVT, I'll kick it to you on which teams have better home court. I think one that comes to mind will be the Denver Nuggets because of altitude and situations like that. But the fact that home court is real but overvalued is something you should be aware of because home team since 2005, they're winning 6 out of 10 games. So they're winning the majority of their games, but they're only covering a little less than 50%, 49.1%. So you got to remember that basically that home court advantage is real, but it's a little overvalued. The public puts a little more stock into it. And as a result, you can take advantage of betting a lot of road teams and heavily bet sports like football and basketball. Really betting an unpopular opinion and buying low on a road team that the public says, they can't walk into that opposing arena and come up with a win. But really, you just care about covering the number. So, these road teams, they're only going to win 4 out of 10 games, but they're covering almost 51% of their games. You're still losing straight up, but it kind of just goes to show you that a lot of these road dogs, especially, can be undervalued. Also, looking at our rundown here, looking at early season dogs, when you look at October, November, kind of before teams start to gel and a lot of defenses are ahead of offense, you have new players you're integrating, that can really benefit underdogs because a team getting points in a game where really you haven't seen any favorites kind of break apart can really be a buy low opportunity early on in the season. That kind of fades once you get closer to Christmas time. But also buying low on road dogs off a loss. This is one that I love because this is kind of one of the ultimate contrarian spots. Public loves home teams. Public loves favorites. Public will also hate to bet on a team who's lost by a ton of points, and they'll also kind of think of that as an auto fade. So this is kind of a perfect system for me as a contrarian bettor. A road dog off a loss when they got blown out the previous game. You can really take advantage of public perception, public bias. They lost by 10 points or more. They cover the next game since 2005, 53% of the time. Even better if they've lost by 15 or more. So it's kind of retraining your mind to look at buying low situations when typically on surface it looks like they can't possibly cover. And then also another one I throw out there, looking at favorites after a double-digit loss. If a team is a favorite tonight and they lost by 10 or more the previous game, public says, man, they played terrible. They might win this game, but they can't win by 11 or more. Actually, buying low on that spot there is 55% ATS. But JVT, how about anything stick out to you there? And also, which teams does home court really provide an advantage for in the NBA?
Yeah, so I'll say this with the home courts because I find it really interesting, and I'm glad you brought up. So one of the two teams that is always brought up when it comes to home court in the NBA are the Denver Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, right? And the reason why those are brought up is because of the inherent home court advantage, which is altitude. It has nothing to do with fans or anything like that. It has to do with the fact you have to play them at altitude, and that plays out in the numbers, right? If you look at Denver just this season that we're playing, we're in the midst of right now, we're waiting to start up again. Denver 25-8 straight up this year, but they're only 15-15-3 against the number. Utah 21-10 straight up at home this year, 13-16-2 against the spread whenever they're playing at home. Those home courts are really overvalued. And to your point, Josh, people I think kind of forget, like you said, if you know it, they know it. It's baked into the line. Some odds makers I've talked to, some handicappers I've talked to, actually value home court usually about 3. Some of them will value the home court for Denver or Utah at 4. And so that's already baked into a number. And so when a bettor comes up and they say, hey, Utah's playing at home, that's an advantage, I'm going to bet it, that's factored into the number already. And I think that's where you lose your little bit of value when you're looking at it. But if you're looking at teams that have been very good at home, you look at teams this season like the Miami Heat, the Philadelphia 76ers have been insanely good at home and awful on the road. And then the Milwaukee Bucks as well. Like those are your top 3 home teams at this point in terms of straight up wins and against the spread. But there's also, kind of to your point too, undervalued home teams. How about the Atlanta Hawks? The Atlanta Hawks aren't good this year. They're 14-20 straight up at home, but they've covered 20 of their games at home. They're 20-13-1 against the spread, so they're always a little undervalued, but they play pretty well at home because they're usually catching points. So I think really when it comes to it, I think there are 2 home courts that are extremely overvalued. It's Denver and it's Utah, and you have to look between the weeds when you look at some of these teams when they're playing at home and realize that they actually do play well at home, even if the straight up results aren't there, and the Atlanta Hawks are a really good example of it.
Yeah, I think it's a great breakdown there, JVT. I would also look at the fact that with home court, are you usually a favorite that is really overvalued, or are you a dog that's undervalued? Because you can look at it a couple different ways. When you look at Utah or Denver, usually they're laying points. They're usually a home favorite, -5 to whatever, -7. Whereas when you're Atlanta, you're a lot of times a home dog because they're a young, scrappy team. It's also one loss records where again, the public will really, really lean on one loss records. If you have a great record, very impressive win percentage, boom, that's going to be an auto play. If you're below 500, that's going to be a team that odds makers will kind of look to take advantage of the public because they're automatically going to want to bet against them. So I think that's critically important as well in terms of talking about value. Are you a popular favorite, or are you an unpopular favorite or an unpopular dog? And always unpopular teams are just good to buy low on anyway because you can take advantage of that public bias from the beginning. But aside from that, I also look at line movement, JVT. To me, when I'm monitoring the market, if you big tip that I would tell a lot of new bettors is learn how to read where a line opens, how it moves, and basically where it's at now, because that can give you insight into where some sharp money is. Because really what I like to do is ask two questions anytime I break down a game. Doesn't really matter what the sport is, but especially in heavily bet sports. Where's the public? Where's the smart money? If you can answer those questions or have a good idea of the answers to those questions, it's really going to give you a leg up overall. So, for example, when you're looking at one thing I look at is inflated lines in the NBA. What is an inflated line? It basically means that the public is super, super heavily betting one side, causes that line to move further toward that favorite. And basically, by buying low, it's another way to go contrarian. You can actually get extra points. So, good example would be, in a game. I also don't want to use specific games. These are more general trends that have proven to be successful over a big sample size. But I remember kind of like the Celtics were at the Indianapolis Pacers. Public was all over the Celtics. They're getting 75, 80% of bets. They open as a 1.5 point game. Public moves it up to 3.5. If you can wait, go contrarian, get the Pacers plus 3.5. You wait it out. You got an inflated line. You're getting a better number. So public can have kind of some line movement here that you can take advantage of. And these inflated line scenarios are a great opportunity to really buy low. Also look at reverse line movement. If you see a situation where maybe the Lakers are playing a team that isn't very good, and they're getting 80% of bets, they open -10, but you see them fall to -8 or fall to -9. Anytime you see basically line movement that makes no sense, it stinks. You smell a rat. What's going on here? Remember that the books aren't stupid, and they're not handing out better numbers to public bettors. They're moving lines because sharp action came in. So, again, buying low in situations where you can get an inflated line or try to, hit a good number before it falls. Like in that example, betting against the Lakers, it opened at 10, it's down to 8. If you had gotten that dog at 10 before it fell, you beat the closing line. That's a good bet overall. So I would really kind of stress the importance of following line movement, monitoring line movement. Where's the public? Where's the sharp action? In the end, to me, if you can, bet against the public, place yourself on the side of the house, make sure that you're with the pro bettors who win at a high rate, and also try to get a good number. That's really going to be a recipe for success no matter what the sport.
Yeah, and that's where your tip about when you can and if you can making power ratings. Like the one thing that has been my biggest tool is making my own power ratings and getting a sense of like where I think the lines are going to move on these overnight lines. And that's another big part of this too, by the way. The NBA, a lot of these books have these overnight lines that you can look at and pick apart at about like I don't know, I think they're about like 9 o'clock, 7, 8, even sometimes as early as 7 o'clock our time here at the West Coast at night. So you can look at the games the next day and you can see what these lines are. And if you have your own power ratings, Josh, you can get a sense of where they might move. And to me, that's been my biggest tool is I can look at a game for the most part. I can see where the number is, where mine are, and you can get a sense of, I think I know where this line is going to move. And more times than not, I've been lucky enough that I have an idea of where that's going to happen. So I think power ratings are pretty important, and keeping track of these right when they come out on the overnight lines are really important as well.
Totally agree, JBT. If you go to vsin.com, highly recommend anyone viewing or listening to go to vsin.com, because we've done a lot of content around power ratings and how important they are. And again, it's going to seem intimidating, but kind of once you get your feet wet, you're going to get better over time. And that can be a huge, huge advantage because, if you're just waking up the next day, you're late to the party, and really, you don't have a sense of, where the line opened and how it moved. You're kind of, you're in the dark there. But I think with power ratings, that really benefits you, JBT, and a lot of sharps, because you can look at it as, okay, I have this game at a certain number. and basically it will let you know whether or not there's value, because if you have a game at a 3 point game, favorite should be 3 points, but the odds makers open that favorite at -1, boom, you hit that game early. If it's right on the number that you opened at, you kind of sit back and wait. And then you can also look at situations where normally you're going to know, okay, the public's really going to hammer, these big teams, favorites, teams with star players, the Lakers, Giannis and the Bucks, teams like that. But
Oh, yeah.
really, it can allow you power ratings to basically, know when to bet a game. Is there value now, and you should hit it early, or should you wait and maybe let the public move the number to give you a better number?
The best example, like, and sometimes, Josh, too, the public actually sets the opening number. What I mean by that is the best example is just this last Christmas, Milwaukee was on the road against Philadelphia. Milwaukee opened up as a 4.5 point favorite on the road against Philly. And I texted Ed Salmons that day, and I'm like, Ed, because he's a 76ers fan and obviously works behind the counter at the Westgate. I'm like, is somebody not playing? Like, what am I missing here? And he just responded, public won't let us open anything under 2.5. And that's an inflated number. It was one of the bigger bets I made of the season, and Philadelphia ended up blowing out Milwaukee that day. So that's why it helps to pay attention and have your own ratings. If you have a sense of where these teams are at, a massively inflated number like Milwaukee 4.5 on the road at Christmas is something you're going to catch on to.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, JBT. And I think that also goes to show you, put in the time, put in the effort. The more you watch these games, the more you get a feel for how these teams are played. That's a really opportunity to take advantage of public perception. And remember, always buying low across any sport is a valuable play.
Right. Well, I want to talk to you about that too, because I'm a big matchup guy, physical on-court matchups. We'll have all that and more here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's the NBA today. Be soon. Welcome back to the Everything Guide to Sports Betting here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel, Josh Appelbaum alongside as well. It is that time, as we do every day here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. Let's talk about building that bankroll up. And again, today's guide, the NBA. So how can you build the bankroll when it comes to NBA betting? And Josh, when I handle building bankrolls and just when I handle handicapping the NBA in general, I'm a matchup handicapper, right? Oh, there it is. I like it. Where's the wolf whistle? So I'm a matchup handicapper. So in other words, I actually like to look, like, I watch a lot of the NBA. It really helps. And I know there's some handicappers who will just play numbers and betting and whatnot in terms of the spreads. But I really like to watch and look at on-court matchups. And so, for example, a team like the Indiana Pacers. The Indiana Pacers are a team who actually rank within the top 5 of three-point shooting, but they rank 30th in terms of three-point attempts. So they don't take that many threes. They're just extremely efficient at it. Their game is actually built within the mid-range. And so in certain matchups, like the Toronto Raptors, the Chicago Bulls, two teams who actually really play mid-range very well defensively, and you can look at a lot of these numbers, that's where matchups that I'll look to fade Indiana in games where mid-range shots aren't going to be at a premium because the team that they're facing actually defends them well. And that's just a small picture of how I handle my handicapping on a night-to-night basis. I like to watch, and I'm an X's and O's matchup handicapper as much as I am getting the best number, obviously, and having power ratings and things of that nature.
Yeah, JVT, I think you bring up a great point here, because number one, you got to remember that there's no one way to bet on sports. So kind of the more different, facets or factors you can take into account, the stronger you're gonna be when it comes to making the smartest bet possible. So you're leaning more on matchups, and what comes to mind too is I was talking to a friend of mine who works for the Celtics, and basically he was talking about daily fantasy. The Celtics, they have no big men. This season really they have no centers, and really they get crushed on the offensive board. So matchup wise, if the Celtics are playing a team, that really crushes the boards, like Andre Drummond comes to mind, Celtics may win that game, but they'll get crushed down low. So why is that important? If you play daily fantasy, if you play DFS, if you're doing DraftKings, I know a buddy of mine who really loaded up on a lot of big men whenever they played the Celtics, because they're even betting their prop over under for rebounds, offensive and defensive. You could really clean up there. So I think that's a great point, because again, there are different factors to keep in mind here. One thing along those lines is like something that gets overrated. Looking at referees, we mentioned it earlier here, but the referees, it's a 3-person crew. You have your crew chief and you have your 2 refs. It's usually announced in the morning, NBA.com every single morning. There are human tendencies there, and this may not be the only reason you bet a game, but if you can look at a crew of 3 refs who all have basically tendencies in the same direction. So a lot of times not all refs are created equal. Some really favor home teams because they want the love of the crowd. Others really favor dogs so they want to appear unbiased. But if you can get a situation where maybe you have three refs, or 2 of 3, or all 3 refs who basically numbers wise really have an edge toward dogs, or dogs on the road, or I look at totals a lot, especially because once you get into a foul game, that can really send an over way up, and cash an over bet, it sails over, because maybe it's kind of right on the edge throughout the game, but late in the fourth quarter, call a lot of fouls, guys get fouled out, they go to the line, that can really send it overall. So again, these factors, no matter in any direction you attack it, I think the key here is putting in the time, putting in the effort, because the more effort you put into watching games, and kind of that's the first thing someone told me a long time ago, is watch the games. The more you know about the teams, the players, the coaching styles, the tendencies, the referees, the arenas, that can really give you a leg up. But I think it's a great point, JVT, looking at matchups, because that can really provide you an edge if you can really if you're keen enough with the eye test to locate an advantage position wise.
Right, and here's there's two more examples of that, and I'll bring up the Celtics team that you just mentioned, right? Celtics, a very small team, as you mentioned, right? They played this Philadelphia 76ers 4 times this season. I have bet on the Philadelphia 76ers in 4 of those matchups, and they went 3-1 straight up and against the spread because of the size that Philadelphia boasts in the front court, and just the team overall, right? The shortest guy on the roster on the floor at sometimes is 6'5" Josh Richardson, and so it's a big advantage for Philadelphia, and it played out in the matchup on the court. The other thing is talking about Philadelphia and looking at a lot of these numbers, right? When both Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid went down, there's sites like Cleaning the Glass, and we'll bring up a couple of them later, that tell you the differentials when these guys are on and off the court, and you can tell that Philadelphia is going to be a bad defensive team when they're both off the floor. And sure enough, in the 7 games without both of those guys, Josh, their defensive rating ballooned to over 120. And so you can get those kind of things, you can get those databases, and you can use a lot of the matchups and the numbers to your advantage. So there's a lot of resources. It's not just the NBA that you can use to your advantage as a handicapper.
Yeah, there's a lot of stats out there. There's a lot of data. You got to remember, there's only 5 guys on the court, at each time. You obviously have your subs come in, but as a result, those players, whether they're on or off, can really affect the spread. Also, small teams, maybe they run it more. They don't have big guys clogging up the paint, could lead to more overs.
All right, we'll talk about tanking in the NBA. We could talk about futures as well. There's plenty to get to in ER. Aaron Renning joins us in about 15 minutes here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. Hey, Quick Picks introduces a new betting game featuring all-time greats from the NFL. If you're looking for action during the shutdown, how about Quick Picks Virtual? Matches superstars from then and now using historical stats to determine winners. Who's better in their prime, Aaron or Peyton? Peyton Manning, come on. Easy answer. Julio, DeAndre, Zeke, or AP. Now with Quick Picks Virtual, you can play these matchups. How about Arian Foster versus, Priest Holmes? That's a good one. Random. It takes less than a minute to create your ticket. Spend as little as 10 cents. Win as much as $50,000. And for a limited time, VSiN customers get this special offer. Get a $1 match up to $100 when you sign up for a new Quick Picks account. Go to quickpicks.com/VSiN bonus. Do it now. This offer will expire soon. Must be at least 21 and a resident where Quick Picks is offered. That's quickpicks.com/VSiN bonus. Start playing with Quick Picks Virtual now. It's the Everything Guide to Sports Betting here on VSiN. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel, Josh Appelbaum alongside as well. NBA, the subject today. So, Josh, let's talk a little bit about tanking, because that is a very popular thing, of course, in terms of just narrative and topics when it comes to the association. Gil, for the first 2 years here on VSiN, had his Tankapalooza once you got to post-All-Star break, where you were playing against a lot of these tanking teams. And there has been a change here with the NBA where they have changed their rules. So the 2019 draft was the first time where they flattened out the lottery odds. You used to get a 25% chance at the top overall pick if you were the team with the worst record. Now the bottom three teams get an equal 14% chance at that number one overall pick. And we saw it last year. The New Orleans Pelicans had a 6% chance to get the first overall pick. They ended up getting Zion Williamson. So this changes how teams have approached post All-Star break, the bad teams, because now you can, it sounds weird, you can afford to win these games. So you're not seeing these funky lineups, and you're seeing a little bit more importance of player development and actually trying to compete in these games down the stretch for bad teams.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, JVT, because number one, you hear tanking, and what does that mean? Basically, what it means is that if you're a really bad team with a bad record, once you get to the tail end of the NBA season, you don't want to say it out loud. You don't want to admit that you're trying to lose games. So basically, that's what you're trying to do because you have no chance at the playoffs. And all you're going to try to do is have the worst record possible so that your ping pong balls, you have as many ping pong balls as possible to try to get you that top pick. So, in the past, you had a huge advantage to tanking. I had a system basically that looked at from game 55 and beyond. So that last handful of games in the tail end of the season, it's all about motivation. If you had a team, basically you're fading bad teams down the stretch who are trying to lose games. So I had a system basically looked at if a team with a win percentage of 350 or less, which I would quantify as a tanking team, is playing a team that's battling for the playoffs, win percentage of around a little less than 50%, around 47% or higher. If you take the road favorite versus the tanking team, it really, really cleaned up. It was about 57%. And basically, the public will overvalue home court when in reality, these teams are trying to lose. So that team fighting for the playoffs, basically as a road favorite, covered at a really, really high number. However, with everything in sports betting, you got to be conscious of a couple things. Number one, the schedule, the time of year, because early season, those dogs perform well because kind of it's a level playing field. Late season tanking, you could, death taxes and tanking, you could really build your bankroll late in the season. However, betting is fluid. Situations change. There's rule changes. There's style changes. There's changes when it comes to the draft. So as a result, you're seeing less of an influence here because, again, you have a team. If you try to lose all your games, that doesn't guarantee you the number one pick like it does in the NFL. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I think it's really important to remember that just because something does really well in the past, yes, that's a good prediction that it could do well in the future. But if things change, it may still be profitable. It may just not be as profitable as it was previously.
Right. And by the way, too, a good example is this year's Warriors, right? They're 15 and 50 again if the regular season were to start up again today. But you look at what they were doing in their last few games, Josh, right before we got postponed, you would think that a tanking team like Golden State, right, it would behoove them to get a top pick. Well, again, because the odds have flattened out, you can afford to bring back Steph Curry and try to get him to play and get these guys involved and get a Steph Curry on the floor. And we know that Steph Curry makes your team much better, even if it's just him on the floor and Draymond Green. And that's the difference here because you would see in the past, I don't think Steph Curry would play if there was a 25% chance with the top overall pick. And here's my last thing on tanking. I think one of the biggest fallacies when it comes to tanking is thinking about the players in this sense. The players are never tanking when it comes to this. The offices and the coaches are tanking, meaning they'll put out bad lineups. They'll put up lineups that mathematically don't make sense, but the players on the floor still give out effort. And I think that's something that people tend to forget. It's the front offices, the executives that are tanking. The players on the floor are always going to give you effort, which is why you get some anomalies with teams scoring upsets, things of that nature.
Totally agree. It basically it helps the franchise if you're able to tank and get increased ping pong ball chances. However, you got to remember these players, they have clauses in their contracts, they have bonuses. If they can, and they want to put up the best numbers possible because especially if you're a free agent, especially if you're a young guy trying to break in, the better that you play, you have other teams looking at you who may sign you to a bigger contract or you get a bonus if you average, guys averaging 17.9 a game. If he averages 18, he gets another I don't know 500K. So that's really, really important overall. I think also JVT talking about the NBA playoffs. We talked about scheduling early season, late season, but now you get to the postseason. So this is kind of a conundrum for me. Number one, playoffs are just super fun to bet on and to watch anyway because the level of competition is ramped up and you get primetime games every single night. But also, what's funny is that normally across all sports, once you get to the postseason, you have an influx of recreational bettors, and as a result, the ticket counts really skyrocket. And when you're a contrarian bettor and betting against the public, the higher the ticket count, the more public bias, the more advantage there is to go contrarian. However, it kind of drives you nuts in the NBA playoffs because you actually have it go the other way. If you're a public bettor, the NBA playoffs can be great because home teams do very well. So do favorites. when you're a contrarian better, you lean on a lot of dogs, you lean on a lot of road teams overall. So kind of just looking at the numbers since 2005, favorites in the NBA playoffs are covering 53% of their games. May not seem very great, but regular season it's more like 49%. You also look at, home court. It plays a huge factor, and you really see a lot of these series where basically every team wins their home game, and kind of the series is decided by who will win a road game. So that's something you also got to keep in mind. The one thing you can look at is kind of a fade the trendy dog scenario, where if you get an undervalued favorite at home where the public might maybe is loading up on the dog getting points, that's where you can take advantage of contrarian value. Also looking at totals, totals in the NBA playoffs, this is changing because you are seeing pace really pick up. But games 1 through 5 historically since '05, the under is a 50-50 coin flip. Once you get to game 6 and 7, you ramp up the defense. It's a tired, grueling, long series. Your legs may not be there. Gets up to 58% to the under. But again, these are the sort of things you want to look out when betting the playoffs, especially if a favorite is off a 10-point loss or more in the playoffs. They usually bounce back, cover at about a 58% rate the next game.
Yeah, odds makers. This is a great example of postseason of odds makers adjusting as well. One of the hottest trends in the NBA postseason in the last 3 years has been teams down 2-0 going back home in Game 3, first quarter, first half. You're laying first half lines in the first quarter. It's nuts how inflated these numbers can get. And there's also the zigzag theory as well, which a lot of people like in the postseason in the NBA. All right, Aaron Renning's going to join us on the other side. We'll pick his brain, a great NBA handicap, especially with those totals, how he approaches the game, and what else we can learn from ER on the other side here on the Everything Guy. Hey, remember to check out vsin.com/subscribe. Everything in terms of vsin plus subscriptions are free until a major sport returns. You won't have to worry about anything paying, canceling, everything in between until a major sport returns. Check it out, vsin.com/subscribe. That is vsin.com/subscribe. You get a lot of good stuff like Point Spread Weekly, and you get to see our beautiful faces because you can watch on vsin.com. All right, with that, it is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel, Josh Appelbaum alongside it as well. And we headed to the phone line is Aaron Renning at ER Sports 1 up on Twitter. Nice enough to give us a couple of minutes. Handicapper over at Better IQ, a great NBA handicapper as well. Aaron, thanks for the time. I have not talked to you in a long time. And of course, not about the NBA. It is very sad. I miss it very much. And I know that you do too.
Absolutely. I mean, we'd be gearing up, I guess, kind of midway between the first round and the second round of the NBA playoffs already, if that were to occur. But I guess more than anything, hopefully we're going to get that chance at some point here this summer with some NBA playoff action.
So I wanted to start with this because one of the things I hear, like when I talk about like the NBA with a lot of people in terms of betting it, especially in the regular season, you hear that it's impossible, and I find it really funny because I don't really think anything's impossible. You just got to put the time and effort into it. So when you're handicapping the NBA, when you hear that it's impossible, like explain what your process is and why it's not. It just takes some paying attention. It takes a lot of gritty like numbers and hours of work, but it's a sport that you can find success in, right?
Yeah, certainly. I think that is the general consensus, guys. If you polled 10 sports bettors, I don't care at what level, they would probably tell you they prefer college basketball over NBA from a betting standpoint. Probably make the same argument with football, college football to NFL as well. And I think that has something to do with it. It just seems a little bit easier to beat. Obviously, it would make sense when you're talking about college basketball where you have, 320 or 300 and some teams. NBA, you're talking about 30 teams. For me, I'm just one person, and I've always kind of approached this from a solo standpoint. For me, I just prefer to kind of be able to get that feel, that locker room feel, if you will, and kind of an understanding of 30 teams rather than 300 teams. And, I think if you, in the NBA to me, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit, it has become a little bit more where you're handicapping these players almost more than the teams. I think that's some of the evolution of the NBA. So in fact, you are almost handicapping 300 and some different entities. I guess if you're handicapping this more by a player situation, but that's how I go about it. And you have a lot more scheduled situations. You have a lot more. These teams are playing 82 games, so that's kind of the way you can kind of get your you can pick your opportunities a little bit better because you have so many more opportunities with these teams.
Hi, Aaron. This is Josh Appelbaum. It's great to meet you for the first time. You and Waz and your whole team do great stuff at Better IQ, so props to that in general. But really excited to have you on the show today. And I just wanted to ask you, we really gear this show a lot toward new bettors who are looking to become a sharp like you. When you're betting the NBA, what are some tips that you can offer to new bettors? How do you basically approach a game? A line comes out, let's just say it's the Lakers -5. What do you first look at? You set your power ratings, you look for discrepancies. What stats do you look at? Situations, scheduling, kind of just some. I know it's tough, but some basic tips that you could offer to a new bettor looking to bet on the NBA.
Yeah, I would say almost number one, if I were to recommend someone to look as a new bettor, I would tell them to probably look and see if they can find props to bet as far as player props. Perhaps over/under for points that would go into rebounds, assists. To me, that would be just kind of an easier market to beat. That you would be talking about smaller limits. You would talk about, those things are just not widely available every day. You're talking about maybe TV games, but I think that would be kind of where there would be opportunity. With that said, I would look at different kind of derivatives and try to maybe specialize in something. As far as perhaps you want to look at first quarters. And with that said, I would try to look more at totals. Try to go on kind of the smaller limit stuff. And maybe it is a little bit more complex to start, but once you kind of figure that out and you kind of train yourself to think in maybe player props or first quarter, how these teams do, find trends within that. That would be kind of the first thing I would recommend. So maybe in a year or two, when you get better, you're kind of an ace at those type of things. But yeah, secondly, for the day-to-day things in the NBA, I think scheduling opportunities are certainly something that you look for. Personally, I think JVT would kind of take the same sentiment where you're looking at teams kind of travel positions, how many games are playing in certain days from 1, 2, 3 weeks out, maybe even a month out with that. And obviously certain trends you could have during an 82-game situation where you're looking at home, road, underdog, favorites. Maybe this team just gets up and plays better against the better teams. Maybe they just do better against the bottom type teams in the NBA. So in very simple terms, these are kind of the things that I would look at if I was getting into betting the NBA.
Those are some great tips, Aaron. And kind of just one quick follow-up. We talk about the NBA being a very popular sport with recreational bettors, which can provide a lot of advantages, especially if you have a contrarian mindset. But since you're a pro bettor, kind of a general open-ended question, but how would you, in your opinion, what separates what we would call a public bettor from a sharp bettor? Just overall, how would you kind of rate those two terms?
That's kind of an interesting question, and I think one of the things that might be I don't think looked at the same as maybe 10, 15 years ago. Certainly in the NFL, again, I just kind of make parallels with sports here. It would be kind of a favorite bettor to an underdog bettor, and NBA maybe to a certain extent. You're looking to bet underdogs to favorites as a pro, or unders to overs. But I would almost take that back to a certain extent. I think the market has kind of changed. I think the lines have become, a little bit more 50-50, if you will, as far as dogs to underdogs. So I'm not sure if that's the right question. And I can't say that I bet any more underdogs than favorites over the course of an NBA season. So I think one of it is maybe the betting the betting volume. I bet a lot of games. I probably bet I would say roughly around 67% of all games. As far as I'm either betting the side or the total. a recreational bettor is certainly not going to play that. They're going to zero in on generally probably 1 or 2 games per night. I think that would be thing. Obviously, the betting amount that you're betting, I wouldn't expect someone to just come off the streets and be betting the same amount that I'm betting, and really just to be able to make a living doing this. Or some guys are just looking at recreation and things like that. So maybe there's some other stuff I could add to that, but kind of in a nutshell, that's kind of how I would base everything.
No, I think that's really good. ER, one of the things is like I've tried to evolve as an NBA bettor because you know how serious I've been trying to take this and progress is one, being more aggressive with the sides. Like I was the guy who would bet like 1 game a night. And then you have your list of games that you like, right? And numbers that you think for your power ratings are advantageous. But I would get a little, sheepish, and I'd bet like 1 game. You ultimately would go 2-1 in your opinions, but you'd go 0-1 because the only game you put money on was the one the one you selected. So it's being more aggressive and it's upping a little bit more in terms of your wagers, without actually maxing out your bankroll. So those are awesome tips. And I wanted to ask you, as opposed to sides and totals, when we handicap these specifically, when you look at totals, what are some of the key factors you look at, like pace, offensive and defensive efficiency, and scheduling on top of that? So when you look at handicapping totals on a night-to-night basis, what are some of the key statistics that you use?
That's and something I can also add to this with that, and this is something that I've been doing the last month here. We've had some downtime. I've really kind of dissected and charted where my winners and losers are coming from. And, it really opens your eyes as far as, I'm charting this, as far as certain, the higher totals, whether I'm doing well on overs and unders, certain teams, underdogs, favorites, certain times of the year. So, if you're trying to get better at this, I can't stress that enough. You really need to pay attention where you are winning, pay attention to where you're losing. So you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive where you're winning and a little less aggressive where you're losing. And that can really make a difference on a bankroll as well. As far as totals, a lot of things, that hit it a lot. Offensive, defensive efficiency, pace. You can't talk about pace, how fast these teams play. Again, you can talk about how teams do as far as maybe against the better teams, teams that win maybe 60% of their games from a pace perspective and from an offensive and defensive ability, and also do that, against maybe the lesser teams, conference teams. Those are a lot of different things you can kind of look at. Obviously, you want to look at to go with pace. You want to look at how teams do from 3-point shooting and kind of break things down on the court. So again, you can make this as big of a puzzle as you want to make it, and I like to say you can make it more of an easier puzzle and kind of do the basic things, but do those things really well.
All righty, hey, we're up against it, man. It was good to hear from you, though. Take care, okay?
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully we'll be back maybe in a month or 2 breaking down some NBA basketball.
I only hope. Aaron Renning, of course, at ER Sports 1 up on Twitter, and a handicapper for Better IQ. All right, Josh, I know we're up against it, so go ahead and run through your journal. What do we got today?
Yeah, real quick, running through the journal. So I think we hit on a lot of concepts today, but talking about the NBA basics, knowing that it's a very, very heavily bet sport, very popular with recreational bettors. As a result, home court advantage is real, but overvalued. Really provides a lot of value to betting a lot of road dogs off losses, buying low in general. Talking about totals. Public leans over, a lot of undervalue, especially in divisional games. Matchups, JVT, you're the king of matchups. And then tanking. It used to be a huge moneymaker, not as much now, but still something you should look at late in the season.
Everything Guide to Sports Betting here on VSiN. Go to vsin.com, find it archived. We will see you tomorrow.